Hello, my name is Hannah Burr. I'm an artist. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan now, and I am from Boston. I like systems, and I like repetition, and I also like using legends like on maps in my work. This is an image of me at the Museum of Fine Arts in front of a legend on the wall. It reads just to my right, noun, discovery, theory, and story next to different materials, which translated into this 37-foot wall where thousands of individual responses to 8 works of art were shown at the MFA. Another project demonstrates my love for color and also for lists in my work. So here I've made kind of a raw data installation of 5 hours observed of everything that took place, all the fleeting events and repeating events in the gallery over 5 hours observed by 5 people. So this is all tape, and it's kind of like a raw data explanation. There's a list in this project as well on the wall, and it just shows these, fidgeting, hands in pockets, touching face. The different things that happened were then translated into tape. So I like lists, I like color, I like systems. I also like to create direct experience and first-hand response in my work. In 2013, I was a little bit surprised to find myself making a book. And even more astonishing to me was that it was a book of prayer, to nothing in particular with swears in it, but nevertheless a book of prayer. This is one of the pages from the book. Thank you, boop, for being the tree in my yard and the chair that I'm sitting in. So this was kind of taking something that had been a religious subject and taking it out of the silo of religion and making it more available to a broader audience. It had a large appeal among Catholic nuns as well as atheists and people attending museum shops and museums. So this was a surprise to me, but it seemed to create a bridge to something that had previously not been very available to a lot of people. In 2015, I made another book called Help Me Boop Do the Thing, which had a similar concept but used actually many of the materials from that earlier installation made out of tape as its visual language. So books were not my plan, but what I found works for me about making books as an artist and as an art project is that they become way more accessible to a much broader group of people than if I were just working with galleries and showing art on gallery walls and museum walls. When I tell people that I'm making a book now about the naturally occurring elements of the periodic table, they often have a response that's a little bit like this page from my second book, like, what? So how did I get from books of prayer to a book about the elements? It started in 2012 when I went to the Southwest and had a bit of a romance with geology. I discovered things like this just on the side of the road driving by, a volcanic plug, which is essentially the petrified insides of a volcano, I think petrified lava, when the rest of the volcano has eroded away over centuries. I also discovered on that trip petrified wood that's turned to stone, and the striations of layers of, let's say, the Grand Canyon walls. And that led me to minerals, and that led me to molecular structure of minerals and how they repeat at a micro scale all the way up the same exact shape from one molecular structure all the way up as they grow. This led me to atoms, and to my surprise, back to this chart, which I hadn't seen since high school. In high school, I got an A in chemistry for memorizing this chart. It had nothing to do with me as far as I understood. It was totally abstract. We learned about men of science and a couple of ladies. I remember vaguely learning what an element was, which is like H, hydrogen, is the lightest element. It has one proton and one electron. Helium, number 2, up at the top there on the right, has 2 protons and 2 electrons. Lithium has 3 protons, 3 electrons, and so forth as they get heavier. So what I rediscovered in 2012 is that an element is a unique atomic structure, and that there are about 120 of them that create everything in the known universe. So they're like the ingredients list for all stuff, everywhere. I wasn't so jazzed about learning the siloed science information, and it really was preparing me for maybe becoming a scientist, but I was already pretty much set on being an artist. So it just didn't feel that relevant. In 2012, though, I rediscovered atoms, and then I rediscovered, or for the first time discovered, these images. This is rhenium. It's a pure element, and I didn't know that an element was like actual stuff and that it was so beautiful. So I just pored over these images, and I was just amazed by what I found. This kind of oily, metallic, very soft looking metal, very shiny, compared to lead, another element, which is kind of whiter, chalkier, duller. It weighs something different, and it's got like a different way that it naturally grows. It looks kind of like a pine cone. Argon is also an element. It's a noble gas, so some elements are liquid, some are gas, some are solid, most are solid. And argon is this beautiful color. It's found in the tires of some luxury cars. It's like an upsell you can get when you buy a luxury car. And it's also in between the panes of double-paned windows as a kind of insulator. So what I was discovering was I was interested not in all of this kind of technical jargon and learning science, but in the first-person perspective of like how and where I could find the elements. And I'm learning that there's nothing you can see, taste, touch, eat, hear, or smell back in 2012 that is not made of these elements. And so I started to hatch this plan to make a book because I selfishly wanted the reference for it myself. I wanted to know where I could find it, etc. And I wanted it to be the information that was relevant to me and nobody else necessarily, not to the scientists. So a little bit about my process. The first thing I did was I created a constraint, which was to do what I love to do, make a stack of paper, and the constraint was make one drawing for every element on the periodic table. I busted out the chart, brought it to my studio, and I started to make these ink and pencil drawings on rag paper. I made one for every element, and they're total abstraction. I'm not trying to illustrate the element, and I didn't really know anything about the elements much yet, so it was kind of an arbitrary assignment of element to drawing. Then I put those aside. And this is not systematic. It happened in kind of cyclically, in a spiral over time. It wasn't something that happened in a neat order. I also kept learning. Some books from the library, some I bought, some were gifted to me as I talked about this with people. There's a lot of great stuff that you can learn just online about the elements. So what I found developing was this system where I wanted to know the nouns, the adjectives, and the verbs, like where you find the element in objects, including in our bodies, in our food, and in the stuff around us, as well as way out in planets and stars and outer space. I also wanted to know how the element behaves, so the verb part of it, and what it's like. So is it smelly? Is it slimy? Is it heavy? Is it chalky, soft? So these are the things I was learning. And I started compiling this information on index cards and eventually kind of got something into a form. So the role of others in my creative projects is worth a few slides here. So I find at the beginning of a creative project that I need to work alone and I need to let something gestate and explore. Maybe it's online, maybe it's watching films, maybe it's books, drawing, whatever it might be. But I have to let something kind of take root and incubate, and at a certain point, something kind of comes together to a point I can share it. And I also get to a point where I have questions for other people. So I invite people in, they might be from an artist group or friends, people that I trust and know something about, but that will give me some objective feedback. Sometimes I do things like create a little bit of a survey. I'll maybe take 3 or 4 people and I'll ask them to sit down with maybe a PowerPoint and then answer some questions, and then we talk about it and I take notes. So one of the challenges that I was bringing to some friends was the issue of design. There is so much information. This was going to be a very information dense book, which it's totally still in process, by the way. So, for example, here's what I kind of arrived at. It's a page spread for Zinc. You've got the abstract drawing on the left, and then you've got a list of everywhere you can find zinc, as well as its qualities, behaviors, and uses. So zinc is bluish-white, lustrous, dull, opaque. It's present in the Lyman alpha galaxy and supernovas, the Earth's atmosphere and crust. It's in our bones and tissue, and it's in a pea. It's in pigments for plastic. It's in cosmetics. It's in streetlights and carburetors. It's in eggs and breast milk and maple syrup and copy paper, in sewage sludge and baby formula. So this is one section of the book. Also, a challenge in the book is the color aspect. There is no color in it so far, right? You haven't seen really much color. So one possible way I might deal with this is in showing the relative abundance of each element as I go. So how much of zinc is there in the solar system, in the atmosphere, in the ocean, in the crust of the Earth, and in our bodies? So I gathered that information and I presented it to people in a few different ways. And you know, what I found was like none of them quite worked. Here's one example. This is in some ways my favorite, but it doesn't actually convey very clearly what I want, and it takes up a lot of room on the page. So basically some forays don't appear to lead anywhere or get resolved, and that's part of the process. So basically others are where I see my best work reflected. And here is some of the feedback that I got. We need more you in this book. They saw me very clearly, or my kind of sentiment in the other 2 books. So where am I in this very formally presented sort of set of lists? And there was some insecurity when I was designing that page spread. So where was I in this? That was one question. Another was, what really inspires you, Hannah? And what do you really care about most in this project? Like, that's what we want to see and what we want to immediately kind of grok when we look at this book. Someone else gave me the advice, they were a designer, to just like loosen up a little and let it be a mess. So I needed to hear that, and even though these were things that I didn't really want to hear because I wanted to be told like, thumbs up, you did a great job, it's all set to go, it was important to hear the truth reflected in others. And I went back to my studio and I went kind of back to the drawing board. I made a big mess and I started working with some of my favorite materials and just playing again. I ended up with this series of element sketches. Here's one example. This is nitrogen. Nitrogen is in ultra smooth ice cream. It's in thunderstorms. It's in our DNA and our brains, and it's also in explosives. Gold is in meteorites, false teeth, laptops, Douglas fir trees, the mustard plant, jewelry, honeysuckle, maybe Mars. Beryllium is in spacecraft and aquamarine. It's in rocket nozzles, stream water. It's in tools that don't spark hitting steel. It's in emeralds, and it's in fake emeralds. Titanium is in fireworks and dictionary pages. It's in sidewalks, and it's in M-type stars. It's in moon rock, and it's in food coloring. In terms of the inspiration for the book and what I most care about, I think it's summed up best in this quote from Carl Sagan. Every atom in your body was once inside a star that exploded. The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than in your right hand, because 200 million stars have exploded to make up the atoms in your body. So this isn't waxing poetic. This is just facts. Like, this is just what they've figured out is true. So look at your left hand and feel it. Look at your right hand and think about that. The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than in your right hand, because 200 million stars have exploded to make up the atoms in your body. So at this point, I'm peppering in some of these quotations, and I'm bringing in some mysticism, and I'm also developing a new section, which are these element sketches. So here's one example. We've got the name and the element abbreviation. We've got where it's created in exploded massive stars and white dwarf stars for cobalt. And then the sketch, and it's typed out for legibility and accessibility on the other page. And then there's a reference number that goes to the other section where you see the more comprehensive list for cobalt. Here's manganese, and here's copper. So a little bit more about the mystical side to this book. So I love Rumi and Walt Whitman and some of these kind of big, vast thinkers. And I love that when Walt Whitman was around, he wrote the Song of Myself, and they were discovering atoms at that time. So it found its way into his poetry. Every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. So this piece about our inseparability is pretty strong throughout this book. An Indian mystic from the last century, Ramana Maharshi, was asked the question, how should we treat others? And his response was, there are no others. Again, the mystical side. And then third, I want to show you on the mysticism front this kind of visual explanation from NASA. It shows on the left the beginning of our universe in what is widely agreed upon to have happened, the Big Bang. So essentially 14 billion years ago, there was this tiny, tiny dense point that exploded, and all of the hydrogen in the known universe was created at that moment. So at no other time, but just in that moment, or in like the next 20 minutes. So then you come across this. We are 10% hydrogen. So all of the hydrogen was created in the Big Bang, and everyone in this room is 10% of that explosion. Also interesting to me is that this is a depiction of kind of the explosion itself, and when it says we live in an expanded universe, I understand that to mean we're in the middle of this explosion and it's still happening. So on those days when you're feeling separate and small and you're wondering like how your review is going to go at work, or like does she still love you, or are you cute enough, or is anybody going to call you, or how are those medical results going to come back, those are the days when I would love for you to pick this book up and remember who you are. Remember what you are, and that you're not separate in any way. Another discovery that I've made recently as I'm looking at this relative abundance is that oceans have about 50% oxygen and 10% hydrogen in them, and many of the same things that we have in our bodies. the human body is like 65% oxygen, 10% hydrogen. Also, the ocean has about the same, it actually has the same ratio of salt to the whole as does our body have salt to the whole of our body. So it's the same ratio of salt in our body to the whole as oceans have in them. So essentially, we're like bags of seawater walking around with a little extra stuff sprinkled in. And again, it's like my first book I just wrote, like perhaps like a drop in the ocean, you and the ocean are well acquainted. That was like on the back page of my book. But it's like, wow, that's actually the case as you really look into some of the facts of elemental ingredients in the world. So essentially, what I'm saying is, and what I'm hoping the book says, is that we are not separate, we are inextricable, we are not silos, and all parts of you were born in a space explosion, collision, or star process. So here are my takeaways from writing this talk and reflecting on my process so far. It's essential to get other people's perspectives and not be a silo after a certain point. It's essential to hold all of it lightly. To know my own response is really important too, because sometimes I'll get 5 people with 5 emphatic opinions that totally contradict each other about layout or about some other aspect of the book. So to know my own response and take time for that, to let myself be seen even when making a mess, that setbacks are an essential part of exploration, to be patient, take breaks, and keep showing up. Currently, this book, on October 18th, 2018, exists as a prototype with a sampling of pages in each section. There are some sections that I haven't shared with you. One is about the origin of the elements, and I'm happy to answer a question about that if you're curious, because it's really exciting. But also, I'm still open to feedback, and I'm wondering where this like lines up or intersects with you and how it's relevant or interesting to you. And also, I would love to know if you want to follow this project and become a part of it in any way as I develop it further. So please come talk to me after the talk and let me know your thoughts. And above all else, remember that you are not a thing.